What could possibly make Jungkook and Jimin step onto the last train home, only to discover a secret that would change their friendship forever? On one unforgettable night, an unexpected encounter, an old promise, and a hidden letter forced them to confront emotions they buried for years. Read this emotional fictional story filled with mystery, friendship, sacrifice, and hope until the very last page. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're reading from. Give this story a like if you enjoy emotional BTS-inspired fiction, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that stay with you long after they end. Now, let's begin. What if the last train of the night wasn't taking Jungkook and Jimin home, but back to the one memory they had spent years trying to forget? The station clock struck 11:58 p.m. Rain fell softly onto the empty platforms, turning the yellow lights into shimmering reflections across the wet concrete. The announcements echoed through the nearly deserted station, but there were only a handful of passengers waiting for the final train leaving Seoul. Jungkook stood quietly near the edge of the platform, hands buried inside the pockets of his dark coat. His hood shielded him from the rain, yet tiny droplets still clung to his hair. He had chosen this station because almost nobody came here. He wanted silence. No cameras. No crowds. No expectations. Just one peaceful ride home. A familiar voice suddenly interrupted the quiet. "I knew I'd find you here." Jungkook slowly turned. Jimin stood a few meters away, holding a small umbrella that had done little to protect him from the rain. His jacket was soaked. His shoes were wet. Yet he smiled as though none of it mattered. "You always disappear when something's bothering you," Jimin said gently. "And somehow, I always end up finding you." Jungkook let out a quiet laugh. "I guess you know me too well." "I'd like to think so." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar. The kind of silence only years of friendship could create. Then the announcement echoed once more. "The final train will arrive in 2 minutes." Jimin glanced toward the empty tracks. "Looks like it's just us tonight." Jungkook nodded. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." The train emerged through the darkness, its headlights cutting through the falling rain like two distant stars. As it slowed to a stop, the doors opened with a soft mechanical hiss. Only 3 passengers stepped off. No one boarded except Jungkook and Jimin. The doors closed behind them. The train pulled away from the station. Neither of them noticed the elderly conductor watching from the next carriage. He looked at them for several seconds before quietly whispering to himself. "So they finally came back." The words were so soft that no one heard them. Not even Jungkook. Inside the nearly empty carriage, the fluorescent lights flickered occasionally as the train moved deeper into the sleeping city. Jimin sat beside the window, while Jungkook chose the seat across from him. Outside, raindrops raced down the glass, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and blue. "You've been avoiding everyone lately," Jimin finally said. "I've just been tired." "No." Jimin shook his head. "You're hiding something." Jungkook looked away. "I didn't want anyone to worry." "You know that's impossible." A faint smile appeared on Jungkook's face. "I guess I forgot who I was talking to." Jimin leaned back in his seat. "Try me." Jungkook remained silent for several long seconds. Then he quietly reached into his backpack. From inside, he carefully removed an old brown envelope. The edges were worn. The paper had yellowed with age. It looked as though someone had protected it for years. Jimin frowned. "What's that?" Jungkook stared at the envelope instead of answering. "I found it yesterday." "Where?" "In my old room." Jimin looked confused. I've never seen it before. Neither had I. Slowly, very slowly, Jungkook turned the envelope over. Written across the front in faded handwriting were only 7 words. Do not open until you are together again. Jimin's heartbeat quickened. What does that mean? Jungkook swallowed. I don't know. But there's something else. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there wasn't just a letter. There was an old train ticket. A ticket dated exactly 10 years earlier. Jimin's face slowly lost all color. His breathing became uneven. No, he whispered. That date. Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. You remember it too. Jimin nodded almost imperceptibly. How could I ever forget? The train suddenly entered a long tunnel. Darkness swallowed every window. For several endless seconds, the reflection staring back at them wasn't the city. It was their own faces. 2 friends, 1 forgotten promise, and a secret neither of them was ready to face. The tunnel seemed endless. The rhythmic sound of the train wheels echoed through the carriage, each metallic click sounding like the ticking of a clock counting down to something neither of them could escape. Jimin never took his eyes off the faded train ticket. His fingers trembled slightly. I thought, he whispered, I threw everything away. Jungkook slowly folded the ticket between his fingers. So did I. The train emerged from the tunnel, and the city lights returned, but neither of them noticed. They were no longer looking outside. They were looking 10 years into the past. When I found the envelope, Jungkook said quietly, I couldn't remember why that date felt so familiar. Jimin lowered his head. I remembered immediately. Silence. Heavy. Painful. The kind of silence that carried years of unspoken regret. Jungkook leaned back in his seat. I think we both promised never to talk about it again. We did. And yet, he gently placed the letter on the table between them. Someone wanted us to remember. Jimin hesitated before reaching toward the envelope. His hand stopped only centimeters away. What if opening it changes everything? Jungkook looked at him with a tired smile. What if it already has? The words settled between them. There was no arguing with them. Because ever since they had stepped onto this last train, nothing had felt ordinary. Jimin finally unfolded the letter. The paper crackled softly. The handwriting was elegant, careful, and unmistakably familiar. His eyes widened. No way. What? Jimin slowly looked up. I know this handwriting. Jungkook frowned. You do? He nodded. It belongs to Mr. Han. Jungkook froze. The old station master. The same one. Memories rushed back like a wave crashing against the shore. Mr. Han, the elderly station master who had worked at this very railway line for decades. The man who always greeted children with warm smiles. The man who secretly gave them hot chocolate during freezing winters whenever they waited for the train after school. The man who always said, every train carries more than passengers, it carries memories. Jungkook could still hear his gentle voice. But, Jungkook frowned. Mr. Han passed away years ago. Jimin nodded slowly. I know. Then why would he leave us this? Neither of them had an answer. Taking a slow breath, Jimin began reading aloud. If the 2 of you are reading this, then you have finally returned together. Both of them instinctively glanced at one another. Perhaps you no longer remember that rainy night. Or perhaps you remember it too well. Either way, there is something you were never told. The train lights flickered once, then twice, almost as if the carriage itself were listening. Jimin continued. 10 years ago, you boarded this very train after making a promise to each other. Neither of you realized that someone else had been sitting only a few seats away. Jungkook's heartbeat quickened. Someone had been watching them. I heard every word. I saw two young boys promising that no matter how famous life might make them, they would never let success become more important than friendship. Jimin slowly lowered the paper. His chest tightened. I remember. Jungkook closed his eyes. So do I. Back then, they had laughed as they made that promise. They had believed the future would be simple. They believed friendship would always stay the same. Neither of them had imagined years filled with exhausting schedules, long separations, different responsibilities, and countless moments where they barely had time to sit down together. They had never stopped caring, but life had quietly stolen the moments they once took for granted. Jimin gave a sad smile. When was the last time we rode a train together? Jungkook searched his memory. He couldn't answer, because he honestly didn't know. The realization hurt more than he expected. Jimin returned to the letter. Friendship does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It fades quietly. One postponed conversation, one missed meal, one forgotten promise, until one day, you realize years have passed. Neither of them spoke. The words felt painfully true. Jungkook stared out the window. The city rushed past in silence. I kept telling myself we'd spend more time together after the next project. Jimin gave a quiet laugh. So did I. But another project always came. And another. And another. Jungkook nodded. We weren't drifting apart because we wanted to. We were just busy surviving. Jimin smiled sadly. Sometimes surviving costs more than we notice. Before either of them could continue, the train suddenly slowed. Much earlier than expected. The brakes let out a long metallic sigh. The carriage lights dimmed. The loudspeaker crackled. Attention passengers. This train will make an unscheduled stop. Jungkook looked toward the dark platform outside. His expression slowly changed. There isn't supposed to be a station here. Jimin followed his gaze. Beyond the rain-covered window stood an old station, abandoned long ago. Its faded sign barely remained attached to the cracked building. Grass grew between the forgotten tracks. The waiting benches were empty. Except one figure stood beneath the broken station clock. An elderly man, wearing the exact railway uniform Mr. Han had worn years ago. Jimin's voice became barely audible. Jungkook, tell me you're seeing him too. The train doors opened by themselves. No announcement. No passengers moved. Only silence. And the old station waiting outside. Neither of them moved. The train doors remained open, revealing the deserted platform beyond. Rain drifted through the doorway in soft waves, carried by a cold wind that seemed to whisper forgotten names. Jungkook blinked several times. The elderly man was still there, standing beneath the cracked station clock, with one hand resting on an old wooden cane. He wasn't waving. He wasn't calling for them. He was simply waiting. Jimin's voice barely escaped his lips. That's impossible. Jungkook nodded without taking his eyes off the platform. Mr. Han passed away 8 years ago. I went to his memorial. So did I. The conductor suddenly appeared from the next carriage. His footsteps were strangely quiet. When he reached them, he smiled gently. Aren't you getting off? Jungkook frowned. I thought this station was closed. The conductor tilted his head slightly. It only opens for passengers who still have somewhere important to return. Jimin exchanged a confused glance with Jungkook. What does that mean? Jimin asked. Instead of answering, the conductor looked at the old train ticket lying on the table. I see you found it. You know about this? Jungkook asked. The conductor nodded. Mr. Han asked me to keep this train running until the day you came back together. Jimin's heart pounded. But how could he know we'd return? The conductor smiled. He didn't. He simply believed that true friendships always find their way home. A silence followed, one so deep that even the sound of rain seemed distant. Finally, Jungkook stood. I want answers. Jimin looked at him. So do I. Together, they stepped onto the empty platform. The moment their feet touched the ground, the train doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. Neither of them noticed. Their attention was fixed on the old station master. Mr. Han smiled exactly as they remembered. Warm, patient, kind. You've grown, he said softly. Jimin felt tears gathering in his eyes. We missed you. Mr. Han chuckled. I know. Jungkook swallowed hard. Are you real? The old man looked toward the rain-covered tracks. Sometimes memories become real enough for one final conversation. Neither of them understood what that meant. Yet somehow, it felt unnecessary to ask. Mr. Han slowly began walking toward the abandoned waiting room. Come. There is something you should see. The building looked untouched by time. Old railway posters still hung crookedly on the walls. Dust covered the wooden benches. An antique station clock had stopped forever at exactly 12:07. Jimin noticed a small metal box resting on the ticket counter. It had their names written across the lid. For Jungkook and Jimin. His breathing caught. Mr. Han gently opened it. Inside were dozens of folded papers. Some were small. Others were longer. Each one carried a handwritten date. Jungkook carefully picked up the first. It read, Open when you begin chasing your dreams. Jimin unfolded another. Open when you feel too busy to laugh together. His hands trembled. There was another. Open after your first argument. Another. Open when one of you feels alone. And another. Open when success becomes heavier than happiness. Jungkook looked at Mr. Han in disbelief. When did you write these? The old man smiled. Long before either of you understood how difficult growing up would become. You knew. I watched many trains leave this station. I watched children become adults. I watched friends promise forever. He paused, and I watched life quietly test every promise. Jimin lowered his eyes. We failed. No. Mr. Han shook his head. You became busy. There is a difference. Jungkook felt an unexpected sting in his chest. For years he had blamed himself. Every canceled dinner. Every postponed conversation. Every birthday celebrated through hurried phone calls. He believed he had let friendship slip away. Yet hearing those words, he realized something. Neither of them had stopped caring. They had simply stopped making time. Mr. Han picked up the final envelope. Unlike the others, it was sealed with purple wax. This one, he whispered, is the reason you're here tonight. Jungkook carefully accepted it. Across the front were only 5 handwritten words. Open before the last stop. The station suddenly shook. A distant train horn echoed through the rain. The conductor's voice called from outside. The train is leaving. Mr. Han looked toward the platform. So is your chance. Jimin looked down at the envelope. His heart raced. He carefully broke the wax seal. Inside, there was no letter, only a single faded photograph. The picture showed two smiling teenage boys sitting on this very train. Jungkook, Jimin, and standing behind them, with one hand resting on each of their shoulders, was a third boy, a boy neither of them recognized. Jimin stared at the photo in disbelief. His face turned pale. Jungkook. His voice trembled. I don't remember him. Jungkook's fingers tightened around the photograph. And neither do I. Yet on the back of the photo, written in Mr. Han's unmistakable handwriting, were 8 chilling words. The one you forgot never forgot either. Outside, the train's whistle echoed once more. But suddenly, it no longer sounded like an invitation to go home. It sounded like a warning. A cold silence settled over the abandoned station. Jungkook could hear nothing except the rain striking the broken roof and the pounding of his own heartbeat. The one you forgot. He read the sentence again, slower this time. Never forgot either. Jimin's hands trembled as he stared at the faded photograph. There has to be a mistake. There isn't, Mr. Han replied softly. The old station master walked toward the dusty window overlooking the tracks. You didn't forget because you wanted to. You forgot because you had to. Neither of them understood. What does that mean? Jungkook asked. Mr. Han looked at the photograph. Tell me what you notice. Jimin studied it more carefully. The third boy stood between them, smiling brightly. He couldn't have been older than 15. He wore a school uniform and held 2 paper train tickets in one hand. Around his wrist was a blue friendship bracelet. His smile felt strangely familiar. I've never seen him before, Jimin whispered. But he frowned. Why does he feel familiar? Jungkook's chest tightened. I was thinking the same thing. Mr. Han nodded. Because memories of the heart don't disappear as easily as memories of the mind. Before either of them could respond, the station lights flickered. For a brief second, the waiting room changed. The dusty benches looked new again. The broken clock began ticking. Laughter echoed through the station. 3 teenage boys ran across the platform, laughing as rain soaked their uniforms. Jungkook's eyes widened. It can't be. One of the boys was unmistakably Jungkook. Another was Jimin. And between them, the mysterious third boy laughed louder than either of them. Come on, he shouted. We're going to miss the train. The vision was so vivid it felt real. Young Jungkook playfully shoved him. Young Jimin grabbed all 3 tickets before the wind could carry them away. The 3 friends climbed aboard the train together, laughing without a care in the world. Then, the vision vanished. The station became old and silent once again. Jimin stumbled backward. I remember. His voice cracked. I remember laughing. I remember running. But every time I try to see his face, he pressed both hands against his head. It disappears. Jungkook closed his eyes. Fragments flashed through his mind. A birthday cake. A guitar. 3 voices singing badly together. Someone saying, no matter what happens, let's always take the last train home together. His eyes flew open. We made that promise. He whispered. There were 3 of us. Mr. Han slowly nodded. Yes. Jimin looked as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Who was he? The old station master remained silent for several moments. Finally, he answered. His name was Minyu. The name struck both of them like lightning, not because they remembered it, but because hearing it felt like reopening a wound they never knew existed. He was your closest friend. He believed in both of you before anyone else did. When people doubted your dreams, he defended them. When you wanted to give up, he reminded you why you started. Jungkook felt tears gathering in his eyes. If he was so important, how could we forget him? Mr. Hand's smile faded. Because grief can be cruel. The room fell completely still. Mr. Hand continued in a quiet voice. 10 years ago, Minyu became seriously ill. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin breathed. He knew his time was short. He made only one request. Mr. Han looked at both of them. He didn't want your dreams to stop because of him. Jimin's lips trembled. No. He asked everyone, including his family, never to tell you how much he was suffering. Jungkook felt tears rolling down his face. He wanted your last memory of him to be laughter, not goodbye. The forgotten pieces finally began falling into place. The last train, the promise, the photograph, the missing face. Their hearts had tried to protect them from unbearable pain by locking away the memory entirely. Jimin fell to his knees. We forgot him. Mr. Han gently shook his head. No. You carried him. You simply didn't know you were carrying him. Jungkook looked confused. What do you mean? The old station master smiled softly. Every time you encouraged one another, every time you chose kindness, every time you refused to give up, you were keeping Minyu's dream alive. Jungkook looked back at the photograph. For the first time, the third boy's smile no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt like home. A sudden gust of wind swept through the station. The photograph slipped from Jungkook's fingers and floated gently across the floor. When he picked it up again, something had changed. A message that hadn't been there before slowly appeared beneath the picture. The ink seemed to write itself. Meet me where our promise began. Outside, the final train let out one long whistle. But this time, only one more stop remained. And somehow, both Jungkook and Jimin already knew exactly where that last stop would be. The train doors slid open the moment Jungkook and Jimin stepped back onto the platform. Neither of them spoke. The photograph remained in Jungkook's trembling hands, while the mysterious words continued to linger in both of their minds. Meet me where our promise began. The conductor stood beside the entrance, waiting patiently. He looked at the photograph and smiled with quiet understanding. So, you finally remembered him. Jimin slowly nodded. Not completely, but enough to know he mattered. The conductor stepped aside. Then it's time for the last stop. The doors closed behind them. The train pulled away from the abandoned station, disappearing once again into the darkness. This time, however, the city outside was gone. No apartment buildings. No highways. No glowing signs. Beyond the windows stretched endless fields covered in silver moonlight. Jungkook frowned. Where are we? The conductor answered without turning around. Some places can only be reached by memory. Neither of them questioned him. After everything that had happened tonight, the impossible no longer seemed impossible. The carriage was completely silent until the train began slowing once more. Unlike the previous stop, there was no station announcement. Only the soft squeal of brakes. The doors opened, Outside stood a tiny countryside station. It looked untouched by time. An old cherry blossom tree stood beside the platform. Its branches stretched over a weathered wooden bench. Pink petals drifted gently through the night, even though there was no wind. Jimin's eyes widened. "I know this place." Jungkook whispered the words almost at the same moment. "This is where we made the promise." The memories returned in flashes. 3 boys sharing a single box of fried chicken. Laughing until their stomachs hurt. Arguing over whose dream sounded the most impossible. Promising that if any one of them ever felt lost, the others would always be waiting at the last train home. Jungkook smiled through tears. "I remember everything now." "So do I," Jimin replied. Together they walked toward the old bench. Someone was already sitting there. A teenage boy. His school uniform looked exactly like the one in the photograph. His blue friendship bracelet reflected softly beneath the moonlight. He wasn't transparent. He wasn't frightening. He simply looked peaceful. He slowly stood as they approached. His smile was exactly the same one frozen in the old photograph. "So," he laughed softly, "it took you long enough." Jimin's breath caught. "Mean you?" The boy smiled. "I've missed hearing my name." Before either of them could move, tears blurred Jungkook's vision. "I'm sorry." The words escaped almost instantly. "I'm so sorry." Jimin lowered his head. "We forgot you." Minyu gently shook his head. "No, you didn't. You forgot the pain." "That's different." Jungkook's voice trembled. "You were alone. You were sick. And we weren't there." Minyu looked up at the cherry blossoms. "I chose that." "What?" "I asked everyone not to tell you." "Why?" His smile became brighter. "Because I knew how much your dreams meant. You both would have stayed. You would have given everything up. And I couldn't allow that." Jimin wiped away his tears. "But friends don't leave each other." Minyu looked at him kindly. "No. They help each other move forward. Even if it means letting go." Silence surrounded the 3 friends. Not an uncomfortable silence. A healing one. Jungkook slowly reached into his pocket. Inside was the faded train ticket. He handed it to Minyu. "I think this belongs to you." Minyu looked at it before smiling. "No. It belongs to all of us." He folded the ticket once and placed it back into Jungkook's hand. It was never a ticket home. It was a reminder. A reminder of what? Minyu looked at both of them. That no matter how far life takes you, the people who truly matter should never become strangers. The words settled deep within their hearts. For years, Jungkook and Jimin had blamed themselves for being too busy, too exhausted, too distracted. But standing there now, they realized something even more important. Friendship wasn't measured by how often people met. It was measured by whether they still chose each other when life became difficult. Minyu stepped backward. The moonlight surrounded him. His figure began fading ever so slightly. Jimin immediately reached forward. "Wait, please. There are still so many things I want to tell you." Minyu smiled warmly. "You already have. When you kept believing in each other. When you stayed kind. When you continued chasing your dreams. I heard every one of those conversations." Jungkook's tears fell freely. "Will we ever meet again?" Minyu looked toward the tracks. "When the last train comes for each of us. Old friends always find one another." The cherry blossom petals suddenly swirled around them. The station bell rang once. A warm breeze passed through the platform. When the petals settled, the bench was empty. Minyu was gone. Only the blue friendship bracelet remained where he had been standing. Jimin carefully picked it up. His fingers shook. Inside the bracelet was a tiny silver charm. Engraved on it were 3 simple initials. JJM asterisk. Jungkook. Jimin. Minyu. 3 friends. 1 promise. 1 last train home. As dawn slowly painted the sky with shades of gold, Jungkook looked toward Jimin and smiled. We've spent years promising to make time. Jimin nodded. But now, we actually will. No matter how busy life becomes. No more waiting for the perfect day. Jungkook laughed softly. Because we learned tonight. The last train doesn't wait forever. Hand in hand with the memories they had finally reclaimed, the 2 friends boarded the train one last time. This time they weren't carrying regret. They were carrying gratitude. And somewhere beyond the morning light, a 3rd friend smiled, knowing that the promise they had made as teenagers had finally found its way home. The end. # epilogue, a promise that never missed its train. 1 year later, spring returned to Seoul. Cherry blossoms lined the streets just as they had on that unforgettable night, painting the city in soft shades of pink and white. Life had become busy again. There were rehearsals, flights, interviews, concerts that filled stadiums with thousands of voices singing in unison. But one thing had changed forever. Jungkook and Jimin never allowed someday to replace today. Whenever they found even a few free hours, they met. Sometimes it was nothing more than sharing coffee at a quiet cafe. Sometimes they took long walks along the Han River without saying much. Sometimes they simply laughed about old memories that only the 2 of them understood. One evening, after finishing a rehearsal, Jimin looked at Jungkook and smiled. Do you know what today is? Jungkook frowned thoughtfully. A Tuesday. Jimin burst into laughter. No. Jungkook scratched the back of his neck. Our debut anniversary. No. I give up. Jimin reached into his pocket and carefully unfolded an old train ticket. The edges were worn, but it was unmistakably the same ticket from that mysterious night. 1 year. Jungkook's smile slowly faded into something softer. Already. It feels like yesterday. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jungkook quietly asked, Do you ever wonder if that night really happened? Jimin looked toward the evening sky. Every day. And he smiled. I stopped trying to explain it. Some memories aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be treasured. Jungkook nodded. I think you're right. Just then, an elderly railway employee approached them. He looked unfamiliar, yet something about his warm smile felt strangely comforting. You dropped this, the man said, handing Jungkook a small blue friendship bracelet. Jungkook froze. I don't think this belongs to me. The employee chuckled. Perhaps not. But someone wanted you to have it. Before either of them could ask another question, the man tipped his cap politely and continued walking. A few seconds later, Jimin turned around. Wait! The platform behind them was empty. The railway employee had vanished. Jungkook looked down at the bracelet. The silver charm caught the sunlight. 3 initials were engraved on it. JJM asterisk. Without saying a word, Jungkook tied the bracelet beside his watch. Jimin smiled. He really hasn't forgotten us. Jungkook looked toward the distant railway tracks stretching into the horizon. No, he never will. Far away, A train whistle echoed through the evening air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frightening. It sounded almost like laughter. Jungkook closed his eyes for a brief moment. Thanks, Minyu. A gentle breeze carried cherry blossom petals across the platform. For the briefest instant, it felt as though a third person was standing beside them again. Then the petals drifted away. Life moved forward. Dreams continued. Friendship endured. And whenever Jungkook and Jimin heard the sound of the last train crossing the city at night, they smiled, not because it reminded them of goodbye, but because it reminded them that the strongest promises are never measured by distance or time. Some friendships never truly leave the station. They simply wait until everyone finds their way home.